All right. Good morning. Today's training is special education maintenance of effort from start to finish, and I'll be your trainer or your host. I'm Lisa Bofelsky Rosa. I am the financial specialist principal here at the Idaho Department of Ed. I am also known as the funding and accountability coordinator. I'm in charge of all of the special education funding for the state of Idaho. I help apply for the grant annually, and I have to certify everyone's maintenance of effort, all y'all LEAs across the state of Idaho every year to make sure that we qualify for that federal grant. All right, so today's agenda, I mentioned before we started the recording, we've got about 60 slides to get through, but as you know, I don't read everything on the slides. A lot of it is context for you to refer to. But today's agenda is really based off of, we've had a lot of turnover in the state, as many states have, and we're going to really kind of go start to finish. We're going to define maintenance of effort. We're going to talk a little bit about the history and evolution of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. How did we get here? Because there's a lot of folks either at the legislature, maybe it's your school board, maybe it's your superintendent that maybe don't have that foundation, and we want you to be able to have that to speak to confidently. We're going to talk about the different funding streams that you guys have available to you for special education. We're going to try to help you guys better understand and manage maintenance of effort. We're going to talk a lot about exceptions, and we're going to get into some of how you report that in the IDEA application. But really our goals for today's training, we want to have that foundational knowledge, building that confidence for you guys in how you can articulate maintenance of effort to the right crowd and know how to give the right type of elevator speech, how to be able to speak up and really be able to articulate well, and just how to understand exceptions, because exceptions are going to really help you guys maintain without too much growth where you can and when you can, to try to reset maintenance of effort as your populations adjust and change year to year. So I always like to give context to why we do things, and I wanted to start with giving you guys an overview or just context here, some references of what we're going to talk about throughout today's training. These codes here in the Code of Federal Regulations, these are what drive what we do, that are outlined in law for us. And so when you need to reference it in more depth, you can. So I like to provide those to you, but we are going to talk about all of these today, hopefully to gain that better perspective. But with that, we're going to dive right in. We're going to get into maintenance of effort. Let's define it, and let's talk about the history of how we got here. But for our purposes, we're going to start with and then circle back around to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. There are a lot of eligibility requirements within it. So the best way to get through this is to help us understand the conditions. We need to start with knowing that the U.S. federal government supports state and local efforts here by providing these IDEA federal grants. But IDEA itself is what's driving things like maintenance of effort. And so to make sure that we're supporting students properly, there's all these rules and regulations inside the IDEA. And one of the biggest ones in there is maintenance of effort. And that is to help us at the state level to maintain and continue to spend state level resources towards supporting these students with disabilities. Compliance. I'm known as the compliance queen sometimes. I don't know if I like that title, but compliance is what drives what we do in a lot of cases. But the other underlying piece here is that it's to ensure growth of these students and more positive outcomes. So yes, there are compliance requirements, but we want to always, what is the goal here? And it's for our students, right? So we want to keep that in mind as we go through today and talk about some of the provisions along the last several decades that got us to where we are. So we're going to do a little bit of a historical look back for special education and how we got here. There's lots of different timelines I could propose to show you, and there's so many pieces that have driven all the services and the restrictions that we may have, but it really picked up in Brown versus Board of Education way back in the 50s. Yeah, so this was where separate but equal was deemed unconstitutional, and that they actually said education is a right. So there was very there were very pivotal disability rights cases that came a long time throughout history here as we look back. Now, I can't go into every single case, but you could if you'd like. But what I really want to highlight are some of the main pieces that drive some of our costs for special education, because this is where, if you don't have a degree in special education, you maybe didn't go through these history lessons, you maybe didn't know all the things that you are required to do to serve students with disabilities. And so we don't like it when we get accused of maybe why we are spending too much money on something, or why would you provide that? Well, we want to give some context. We want to have you guys have this in your pocket, have this as your elevator speech to be able to say, yeah, there's definitely been case law that has come out and foundational things since the 50s that have really driven why we do what we do. So some of the big ones here is we're looking at this slide. It continued to go through court cases, and then public law 91-230 was the Education of the Handicapped Act, and that was when they started providing federal grants to help states support students with disabilities. Because as they have integrated into our general ed classrooms, they required additional supports, specialized instruction, things to help them to reach their educational goals. And it continued to evolve over time into the early 70s. Eventually, in 1975, when Gerald Ford signed Public Law 94-142, known as the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act. And that's really when things picked up for based on the things that we do nowadays. So let's go back to one before that in 1970. This is Public Law 91-230. Education of the Handicapped Act. This replaced some of the earlier pieces of the ESEA provisions, and it consolidated, so to speak, some of the funding for these programs, and it really helped provide grants to states to develop even further to guarantee individual student rights. And this, as we know, as we receive lots of federal grants, that with the grants, there's lots of specific conditions. So those conditions we live and abide by drive some of the practices, right? So as we talk about the cost behind things, this is where these provisions in public laws continue to evolve and define the practices that we do every day in our schools. Now, when we got to 1975, this then Public Law 94-142, known as the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act, this one was really the one that evolved eventually into IDEA. But this is where we started hearing things like FAPE, the concept of FAPE, this free appropriate public education for all children with disabilities, least restrictive environment. You'll hear maybe a special ed director talk about LRE, this or that. What is that? Well, it's the least restrictive environment. Evidence-based practices show that these students do better when they're in a less restrictive environment. Instead of being in their own separate classroom, to integrate them in the other classroom. It's just like anything. You want to get better at playing soccer, get on a really good team, and you will get better at soccer. And so on and so forth. So that's a lot of what drives some of the conditions and other supports that might be necessary as well. And then the IEP, we hear IEP. Well, what is that? Well, this was individualized programs for students. So this is your game plan per student that really helps to see student growth. And so this was new. And this really drives what happens for all of these students with disabilities. And your special education directors can really talk to this. And I'm hoping that just, again, by bringing some of these concepts forward, defining what some of them are, at least giving you guys a little snippet about, oh yeah, that's right, I've heard that. I've heard that talked about, to understand what it is that our special education teams are doing in our schools. And then also this public law brought about procedural safeguards, due process, and really enhanced parental involvement. But really, again, back to receiving a federal grant, in order to get it, look, we have to do a lot of things now. We have to properly identify, evaluate, and then serve all students with disabilities. And there's so much in here to learn from. I am not here to tell you everything. If you want that, you really need a degree in special education. And so I would really encourage you all that are in other support roles, if you're in the business office or administration, to really talk to your special ed directors and learn more from them about the kids that they're serving, and some of the things that are, really important to them and driving some of the costs too. But let's get into some more about Public Law 94-142. What did it do? It really made sure that the students that were previously excluded had the right to receive student services. They had rights to be brought into the public schools. And at the time that they voted this in, the federal government said, hey, we're going to pay 40%. We'll pay for 40% of this. That has never happened. Congress really stepped back a little and amended the law to say, oh, we'll pay a maximum of 40%. But either way, they've never got there. I think they've gotten closer to 20% of total cost to serve students with disabilities in states. But today, nationally, we see anywhere from 15 to 18%. And I'll tell you, it depends on the year for us. During the pandemic, we had some supplemental funding. And when we did, we saw IDEA funding did actually support a little bit higher. We got closer to 19%, but depends on the year, really. And we'll get into some of the other sources that also kind of level out some of that as well. But overall, IDEA funding is very, very flat. So we don't see large growth in that. But what we do know is that inflation and other costs go up in general. So if we don't see an increase in those IDEA funds, we see our state level costs usually go up. All right, so as we continue to evolve the story, we now get into the IDEA. Public Law 101-476 in 1990 was later renamed IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It added some other categories for autism and TBI, traumatic brain injury, and it really strengthened transition services for post-school outcomes. So what do we do beyond that? And then I just have reference here in 1997, and the last time that they redefined this was in 2004. And they continue to refine the procedural protections, accountability measures on, and they're going to continue to do that over time. The last time it was authorized was in 2004. So we don't know when the next reauthorization will happen and if they will tweak other things, but right now that is the one we are living and breathing by. And if you have questions specifically to that, feel free to reach out and I can always try and find the answers for you. Many times I go back to your experts, which are the LEAs, right? Those are our special ed directors that know this like the back of their hands, to see how they might interpret something as well. But let's get back into the grants themselves. So when we have, now we have these federal grants from the IDEA funding, and we have both a preschool grant and we have a school age grant, or the main IDEA Part B grant. And really, the purpose of these grants is to assist the state. They're supplemental funds. They're going to assist us to provide services towards those excess costs to serve these students that have this specially designed instruction and so on and so forth. And we're going to kind of circle and weave in some concepts throughout the training, but let's talk a little bit about maintenance of effort. The requirements that we know them today appeared in the late 90s in some of the amendments to the IDEA, and really what maintenance of effort did, it was to try and ensure that federal funds, those supplemental funds from IDEA, are not replaced. They're not just replacing our state costs, so we can't supplant them. We're going to talk about that in another minute. But really, this is driven primarily from 34 CFR 300-203. This outlines maintenance of effort, and it really says states must maintain their own spending. You guys are going to support the costs, and we will supplement from the federal level with these other IDEA grant funds. That's really what it is. So we can't supplant. We have to budget each year. Why is it required? Well, it's required in the code. We don't want to supplant. We want to enhance with those funds. But what we have to do to be able to get the IDEA federal grants, we have to budget at least as much as what we expended in the most recent year, where we met maintenance of effort. So we have to expend the same as the previous year, and then we have to budget to spend the next year. So we keep building on that. So as our costs go up, anyway, you look at it, just inflation alone, or maybe it's the career ladder growth, or who you can retain to provide services. Those costs are there, and they're going to most likely continue to grow, especially if your student population is growing. But there's lots of other pieces that can impact that. We'll touch on those too. But with that, you'll hear the two standards that we have to live by. It's both the compliance and the eligibility standard, and it's what we just talked about. We have to maintain our budgeting to be eligible. And our spending or expenditures, that is the compliance piece. So we have to budget and we have to spend accordingly. That's all those mean. I know they kind of sound a little scary sometimes, but we're doing it. Every time you guys apply for funds, we go through the two steps. We go through a preliminary application in the spring where I say, hey, do you want the funds? And if so, give me a budget that would meet the budget requirement, the eligibility standard to be eligible for those funds. I'm going to say I'm going to spend the same or more. And then in the fall or the late summer, the time that we're on right now, we do the second piece. That's the eligibility standard. And that's where inside the IDEA application, you guys as LEAs, as local education agencies, our school districts and charters, you guys are reporting to me based on last year's actual expenditures. So you're going to say, all right, this is what you guys are doing right now. You compare to the most recent compliance year, which at the time was the 23 to 24 school year. And you're going to say, I spent this much, and now I'm closing up my 24-25 school year. And in that school year, we have now at least spent the same or more. And then you take a look again at that, and you're going to nudge your budget up a bit if you need to, if you've raised that up. So that's what we're doing right now in the application, and we'll get to that in a couple minutes as well to look at that some more. But there are several standards that you can use to meet that level of effort. And that level of effort, again, is what you're spending out of your state and local dollars on special education. This is your main skin in the game. This is you as the state of Idaho. You guys are saying, here's what we are spending to support students with disabilities. But we can meet it a couple different ways. We can have a combination of state and local funds. And I will tell you every single LEA except one of you who has a permanent levy. Everybody else is combining state and local funds. The one district that has a local only option, because they have that permanent local levy, they're spending those local levy dollars separately through fund accounting. But the rest of you all know that that would be really ridiculously difficult to separate. And so very common across the nation, almost everybody uses the combination of state and local funds. And so that is usually, you can either do it on a total amount or a per capita, per pupil. And so really what that means is the total dollar amounts divided by your child count or your students with disabilities population. So you can either meet it that way. So sometimes as your student populations change, it will actually grow. If you think about the divisor, if you shrink it, that divisor changes, and then you may meet it that way. So those are the 4 ways that we can meet maintenance of effort. But year to year, you have to keep spending that same amount or more. That's known as your MOE threshold. Okay, and we'll look at the threshold table that I've put in place for you. But back to the requirements, and I've got the codes here for you. Really, the requirements say that you have to spend the same amount, local, state, and local dollars on special ed from year to year. And really, it's a protection. The purpose is it is protection that you don't supplant, that you are not just replacing that. So we want to maintain and grow our services and supports. So again, that federal funding, if you think about it, is to help you guys as the costs go up. That is supposed to help offset those costs increasing. But you have to keep maintaining in one of those 4 ways. All right, let's talk about, I keep saying, don't supplant. So there's a concept known as supplement, not supplant. I wanted to explain that in a little bit more terms here. I said it a few times, but you can't replace. You can't just say, great, last year we spent $100,000 of our state and local, and I just got a $20,000 IDEA grant. Now I only have to spend $80,000. of our state and local. That is not how it works. They want you to spend 120,000. They want you to supplement the program. So really, this is to help you guys in context. If you have folks say, well, why don't you just save us money and use the federal dollars to save us money? It's to enhance the program. So this is, again, just context for you in case those conversations come up. Okay, next up. I've been talking a lot about maintenance of effort, and again, as you see on even all of my labels of our slides, this is specifically special education maintenance of effort, but there's more than one type of MOE. So ESEA has a provision for the title funds for maintenance of effort, and it is slightly different. So I really wanted to make sure that you guys understand when you hear MOE, you also might want to say, which MOE, so that you understand who you're talking to and what they might be assuming is maybe an exception or something that's available that's different under a different program. So really, Title I is different. They have, for instance, a 90% threshold year to year that they have to meet, whereas IDEA is 100%. You got to be 100% or more. So a little different, but really same concept. They want you to spend the same or more, pretty close to at least, at that 90% level. But they do have some additional exclusions. They have different waivers that you can apply for that are different. So just keep that in mind. I'm not going to try and explain everything under Title I because that is not my world. But what we want to make sure you guys understand is that you may have people say, why don't you just apply for the waiver? Well, that's different. That's title. That is not IDEA. So that is why I have brought this in. And really just, I'm a visual person, and maybe you are too. This is a nice one to compare in case you have that person that says, well, I thought they would just reduce our grant. No, in fact, if we fail IDEA maintenance of effort, we got to send money back to the feds to qualify for the new grant, things like that. So just some talking points, again, foundational knowledge for you guys to help support confidence behind speaking to this. Again, it could be a school board member that maybe thought they knew something about this, and they probably know something about the title piece, perhaps, but maybe not the IDEA side. Maybe it was one of your other administrators or a teacher or somebody that says, well, it's not that big of a deal. We just apply for the waiver. So make sure you have these talking points. Okay. Next, we are going to go into the rising costs of maintenance of effort. I know it's scary, but we're going to do this together. Okay, so we talked a little bit about court outcomes. We're going to get into a little bit more. We're going to weave right back into some of those costs, but the Supreme Court really has repeatedly rejected the idea of cost caps for students, the services behind students with disabilities. But you guys know money doesn't grow on trees. And so you guys are balancing that out as best that you can to meet the needs of your students. And that's really the guiding principle here. We want to meet the needs of the students, but we can't just say we're not going to do it because we can't afford it. We have to find a way. And on this slide, I have kind of a general average here in the last couple of years of costs outlined for you. So depending on the year, during the pandemic, when Medicaid actually paid out a higher rate back to you, we got as high as I think 16 or 17% of our total special education costs in Idaho were covered by Medicaid, school-based Medicaid reimbursements. But on average, we're back down to around 13 to 14%. For IDEA funds, it's covering somewhere between 15 to 17%. Right now, this is more recently because of the pandemic funds. Some of you guys had built up a larger carryover in IDEA and you were spending that out in the last year. I do foresee that going back down to the 15% level for the IDEA, which is the dark orange here. The blue there was Medicaid. And then about 2% annually of our other cost to serve students with disabilities comes from things like title funds, or came from ESSER during the ESSER days. Those are gone now, though. But a lot of you guys are using, and it's totally allowable, you can use Title I dollars to help support positions for special education. But it's obviously not a large percentage of costs that are being covered by those funding streams, because there's a lot of other things that those fund. But the big piece here that we all know is that the majority of the costs are state funded. These are your state and local dollars. But as you guys know, the state funding formula only provides what it provides specifically to students with disabilities populations that it assumes in its formula. And so then you guys are using discretionary funds and moving things around as you need to and as you have to provide the services here. And so that's something that we all want to just have as a talking point to be able to articulate back to folks that may ask questions about why is this such a big deal? Or as you see legislation coming out, why are you guys asking for more funding, or why do we need a levy, or whatever it might be? Well, you need to be able to talk in general about what costs what. And as you guys are here for IDEA purposes on this webinar, I'm assuming somehow you're tied to special education. So that's why you're here to learn about that. So keep that in the back of your mind. Most of the costs are coming from your state and local dollars. Now let's get back into, I told you we'd weave back into this about some of those court cases. So FAPE, remember how we talked about FAPE when that came about? One of the first cases interpreting FAPE was Board of Education versus Rowley in 1982. And it really defined FAPE as providing some educational benefit, but it didn't impose maximum spending limits. So what they were saying here is it was clarifying some of the individual, that schools need to provide individual services that will be, showing some significant some progress. So this could be costly. So they start implying here that you need to invest to make some progress. But this was tied back into FAPE. They want to see that free, appropriate public education is benefiting students with disabilities. Okay, but again, they're providing this guidance to us without any new federal funding behind it. So IDEA funding has really, really, really remained flat and not kept up with inflation. So that adds to the state and local burden. Okay, now another one that came about expands health and related services. And this was Independent School District versus Teacher in 1984. And this was tied very specifically to a certain student that required some health services. And so they qualified some of these health services as a related service. And so really it was necessary for these things to take place so that a student could attend school. So it really, the impact on you all from these cases is it says that schools must provide certain health services as long as they're necessary for the child to benefit from education, and as long as they don't require an actual doctor or physician. So that was huge because, as you guys now know, there are a lot of other health services. And yes, some of those services may be partially billable for some reimbursement under our school-based Medicaid process, but not all students qualify for Medicaid. And not all services are billable under Medicaid. And Medicaid itself is a fee schedule that is not reflective of what you actually probably pay for a service. So all of those things you guys know in the special ed world, be able to articulate what I just said about Medicaid as well when you're talking about how you have to provide these services to these students to be able to attend school and benefit from education. So just make sure you have that in your talking points. We aren't going to get real heavy into Medicaid today. So okay, related services continue. Let's talk about nurses. Okay, so more court cases come along, and in these cases really they continue to define this one was tied to a student who was on a ventilator, right? We have some tracheotomy kids. They are on, ventilators, things that, really need a nurse there available. We're not talking the general school nurse that's there to provide Band-Aids and everything else that they do for all the students coming to the nurse's office. This is a totally different nurse. And so sometimes you have to have that extra qualified person available to attend to one student. And so this case really clarified that you cannot just say you don't want to do this because it's expensive. If it's medically necessary, you have to provide it, to provide FAPE. So they tied it back to FAPE. Okay, so super important to be able to tie these things back. Now I'm skipping way forward in time and there's tons of things in between, but we're just cherry picking on some big things that drive some of these costs up, period, for special education that, as you saw, will probably hit your general fund. But here's another one. This was Andrew. You'll hear it referred to. And really what this is this really, again, pushed back to the idea of saying what level of educational benefits really does satisfy FAPE, what really shows that you are enabling a child to make progress. And so in light of whatever the children's circumstances or needs are. So it really implied that you have to probably invest more money for some of those students. And so again, it just really wanted to push more about how you can't use cost as a barrier to FAPE. And so those are some foundational pieces just to help you guys have that talking point of why some of the costs are what they are. Now let's move forward into some of the funding streams. We're going to get back, we'll tie all this back together in the end, but I want to bring about the ways that our business managers are tracking everything. They have to track things through fund accounting. And we have three major sources for special education. What we know is our maintenance of effort, what we spend on special education out of that state and local funding in the general fund, Fund 100. We also have Fund 260, which is for those Medicaid eligible expenditure related reimbursements. And key to this is that it pays before IDEA federal grant money. It's the middleman, as I call it, if you're billing. Okay. And then last but not least is IDEA, supplemental. So again, must meet maintenance of effort, must spend your state and local dollars, skin in the game. You might get a Medicaid eligible reimbursement. It's kind of like a rebate coupon for some of what you spent. And then last but not least, we have supplemental funding from IDEA that is there to help support the growth in costs. Okay. And those are those federal entitlement grants. And that's the order. Okay. That's the order. Now, again, I try to say this lots of different ways. Maintenance of effort is just your general fund, state and local education dollar expenses. iFarms, that is what we talked about in the previous slide as well, those different fund accounting. Those are our accounting pieces that we use to track all these funding sources. But three specific function program codes, which is the second part of the code. So Fund 100 is general fund, but 521, 22, and 616 are three codes that we use to track special education specific costs. So not revenue, this is cost, expenditures. So if it is a general fund instructional school-aged expense, kindergarten and up, we're going to use a 521. If it is a preschool expenditure, even if you don't have a preschool program, but you are providing services and supports to 3 to 5-year-olds as required, and it hits general fund, you want to put that in a 522 code. Not instructional and other support services for special education for both school age and preschool go in that 616 code. And this is how we are tracking it, and for budgeting and for reporting back to the legislature and the federal government. Now, balancing. It's a balancing act, we know that, but I like to talk about this as part of your year end, but it is year long, right? We have to review what the threshold is. We need to know in our minds, we'll look at those tables in a minute, what the threshold is to meet. We need to be able to project the expenditures so that we're on track to hit it at the end of the year. I have XX for each year moving forward. We need to be able to analyze Medicaid throughout the year. Remember, it's the middleman. We have to make sure all of our claims are in a timely manner to make sure that we understand what kind of rebate coupons we're getting for those costs. Because if you think about it, we're serving the kid no matter what. But if those Medicaid costs go down or reimbursements go down because they change the fee schedule or however else we go about it, less kids qualified, you never know who's going to walk through your door if they're Medicaid eligible or not. You have to analyze that. So that's where business office and special ed folks really need to talk on a regular basis. Hey, do we have a similar kids that we're billing for? Are you anticipating that we're going to be caught up by January? Because I really want to try and project through the end of the year so I have an idea of where we're at, right? You got to have those conversations. And then balancing at the end with IDEA funds so that we don't grow maintenance of effort too high. Obviously, we want to meet it, but again, supplemental funds there to help support the costs overall. Okay. Let's talk about some myths here. Myths and truths, as I call it. True or false? I should not report any more of my maintenance of effort costs over what I spent last year. I have people that it shows they're only $1 more. And so I have to look at that when they report to me to see if I see, fluctuating child count or fluctuating use of IDEA funds or Medicaid, because the answer to this is false. You're very lucky if you don't grow maintenance of effort, but just again, back to inflation and the career ladder costs, everything else that we're doing to provide services, likely everything goes up a little, right? So it's false. Really, you're very, very few of you ever keep it the exact same. And we'll see those growths in our tables when we look at them in the IDEA app. But tracking and reporting the true costs is not only a legal requirement, but it provides for the advocacy of the funding efforts. So if you think about when we're telling the story right now to our legislature and we're saying, here's what it costs to serve special education. IDEA only covers this. School-based Medicaid's only covering that. The rest of it is hitting our discretionary pots of money. We need more support. If we don't have a true capture of that, we can't really provide the need back to the feds or back to the state. Okay, more myths and truths continued. True or false? Moving expenditures between maintenance of effort and the IDEA fund is supplanting. False here. As long as you still meet maintenance of effort, you get to go between Medicaid maintenance of effort and IDEA, right? You got to meet maintenance of effort. You got to zero out and use those, apply those rebate coupons, if you will, for Medicaid to support those costs, and then use the IDEA in the end, okay? But you can move stuff around as long as you're meeting maintenance of effort. Those three funding streams, you can move in and out, and it's not considered supplanting, okay? All right, now let's talk about the app. I promised you the threshold tables. We've been talking about thresholds. So this is what it looks like in the application. When you go inside your application, there is a maintenance of effort section, and it's got a bunch of tabs across the screen, and it shows you your history, your threshold table. I have it highlighted for you through programming. Thank you, programmers. I also have an adjusted total and a per pupil total at the bottom that the green arrows are pointing to. So it is telling you over time, it's showing you the growth by the school year. It's showing you your combined totals, your adjusted totals, all the things for you guys to track. It's showing the child count. All the different pieces are there. It's very transparent for you or anyone else to look at, okay? Now, when we go in to report our expenditures, that is known as Section 2 expenditures, shifting over a couple tabs. I've got a picture here up on the screen, and that threshold, those dollar amounts that I had in there, translate in. I pull it into this page to remind you so you don't have to flip back and forth. And that's what I show you there on the lower left side of the screen. I'm telling you that you've got to hit at least 115,611 here. I'm trying to tell you what you need to do from the last time you reported. And you're going to transparently report to me and notice what's on this page. This is those iFarm codes. It's saying, what did you spend out of 10521 school-aged costs out of the general fund for students with disabilities? Did you have any preschool costs? This school did not. Did you have any non-instructional costs? Yes, we did. And then we also require you to include your school-based Medicaid match because you have to use state and local funds to pay match. It's counted, okay? So you capture all those things because that's not part of the amount you net back out of Medicaid. So that is a cost, okay? So all of that gets added. I total it together for you and tell you if you meet it. If you didn't, you get these big red alerts that say you failed by it, and it gives you the math. It tells you. So all of these pieces in here, this is the compliance piece that you're telling me right now. What did we spend last school year? Okay. Now the second part is the budget. We moved over a tab there at the top. Section 3 is our budget. To meet the budget requirement, we have to exceed what we did last year. So in the school year before, we had 115. I'm going to flip back. We grew it to 118,000 for the school year ending June 30th of 25. So as I'm projecting what to spend this year to end the school year 26, I think my costs are going to go up again. And so I am now projecting that I will spend 151,000. Now, key to this is I just have to project that I'm spending at least the same or more. you don't have to then hit this exact amount. So you might come in at 135,000. That would still be okay. This is just what you're projecting, and we require under those eligibility requirements that you are exceeding what you did the last year as your growing maintenance of effort according to the regs. Okay. Um, Super important to maintaining level of effort is maintaining the world we're living in. And we know our student populations are adapting and fluctuating all the time. You never know who's going to come through your doors. We are public education. We accept everybody, okay? And we have open enrollment, right? So that really can change things, okay? But exceptions to maintenance of effort will help you to reset based on who you're serving. Okay, there's two types of exceptions. You can have an expenditure exception based on the prior year and what you did and what might not have just happened in the current year you're closing out. And you can then project for a budget exception. And you can say, hey, little Timmy moved out. He cost X amount last year, but he's not here this year. So I'm going to project that his one-to-one costs are not there anymore. And so I'm going to project that this year's budget's going to be a little lower. Okay. So that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about. This is the exception language here. You can reduce based off of the preceding year. You can do it on either that compliance standard for expenditure or the budget eligibility. Okay. And there are very specific allowable exceptions that we're going to dive into. Here they are. Okay. Couple of reasons. They're very, very, very articulated under IDEA in code. Okay. The first one is voluntary departure, retirement or otherwise, or departure for just cause for your special education or related service personnel. This one's huge. This one is, Susan was at the top of the pay scale. She left. We replaced it with a first year teacher and she costs a lot less. We have some cost differences that we can reduce by. The decrease in enrollment, that's a big one. That's an easy one that I'll show you. Termination of an obligation of the agency that was tied to a specific cost or student because either they left your jurisdiction, they aged out, they don't want services or no longer need services. Sometimes you have high school parents that are like, our kid doesn't want speech anymore, so we're not going to keep doing that, right? So these things happen. And what about if you had to buy something and it was a costly piece of equipment, but it was a one-timer, right? We had to remodel or we had to bus purchase or whatever it was, has to be over 5,000, okay? Great news. Multiple exceptions are allowed. You can take some for this and that in the same year. You can have a budget exception and an expenditure exception. All these things are allowed to help you reduce the requirement and that threshold level, and it will reset you going forward, not just 1 year. It resets you moving forward. So you can take these, you can combine these. So it's worth tracking what's happening in your special education program to see if you can apply for any of these exceptions. Now I've built in a worksheet. Want to make sure that you guys know that. It's very transparent. It helps you do the math. There's a button that says add file. You have to give me supporting documentation, but it ties back to that other page, those pages that calculate. It sucks it right in and shows you that if you've met it or not. It shows you your new per pupil amount. Super helpful. And I want to again go back to the first exception, which is voluntary departure. This one really, for either just cause or retirement or otherwise, this is the one that's usually the most impactful, that you guys are seeing these salary structure movements when you have staff that are turning over. So this is the big one that you should really hone in on to get some cost savings. And again, as you're journaling this and keeping track about this is what you're anticipating, but it might not come to pass because someone else might move in or some new cost might totally wipe out what you thought you were going to lower maintenance of effort by. But keep tracking this because you might be able to apply these exceptions. They're worth tracking and asking for. So I do have some more slides on this coming up. This one is more for reference, but let's talk about some examples. I like examples. How about the retirement or a dismissal for misconduct mid-year, right? Breach of contract, whatever it might have been in mid-year might have reduced those costs. So how about this for an example? We have a special ed teacher paid with state funds. They retired in 2024-25 school year. And for this new school year, we have a brand new special education teacher paid a lower amount. She's fresh out of college. The difference between their salaries will become an exception for you guys. So that's great. That's great news. Okay. Here's another one. Paraprofessionals paid with these funds resigned. We couldn't fill the position. We tried. Okay, that's going to be an exception. And I have some unallowables down here below. And I have a better view of that here. Forced transfers, reduction in force, layoffs, eliminating positions, those are all not allowed, right? You can't just do that because you didn't feel like keeping that position. So be able to answer these questions at the bottom to ensure how do you continue to ensure FAPE happened and to provide these services to students with disabilities. Okay, moving along into the exception for decreased students with disabilities. Oh my goodness, we calculate it for you based off of child count that's reported. So if you guys have a drop in child count, we take that difference in the child count and multiply it for you on the per pupil amount that you have in MOE, and you auto qualify for an exception just based on the child count drop. Now you can also articulate the total that you are saving from a one-to-one or something else separately. And that's the termination of an obligation. Here that we have some more examples that you have to be able to show. Maybe it was that personal nurse tied to little Timmy who moved out of your district or whatever it might have been, or a student that aged out and we don't have that full-time nurse associated anymore. Those things can also be articulated and they may provide you a larger drop to maintenance of effort. So that's why it's so important to track that, journal that throughout the year. Obligation change example, there's that one-to-one example I just gave. You can drop that because they left the jurisdictions and you're not going to be paying for it this school year. So that's one you're anticipating, okay? Exceptionally costly program, the one-to-one professionals. Sometimes there's a change to the student's IEP. Now, you can't just do it for convenience sake, but sometimes they've made progress. Sometimes they're making that growth and the changes are going to happen. So if this happens, special ed director, you really need to make sure that you prove this out and show that through the IEP. And that's probably something I will ask for when you ask for these types of reductions. But these things can happen. You can have a change, which means you're not going to have the same cost tied to it for those exceptionally cost programs. Okay, termination of that capital outlay change. You bought the bus the one time. Those are also those things to keep in mind that you could then say, hey, I only needed the bus one time, not every year, Lisa. Okay, so those are the other ones. Separate from the generalized exceptions we just talked about were the adjustment to local efforts that I want to show you guys. This is also auto-calculated. Basically, what this means is you got a little bit more in IDEA funding, so the feds say, oh, whatever the increase in IDEA funding, you can reduce MOE by half of that increase, okay? And we calculate it for you. And you can choose to take the whole thing or not. In this case, it equated to a whole $638. You could take a $5 decrease, right? So there, or you could take all of it, but we require you to type it in. And a lot of you guys don't take this one because you assume growth in the costs. And so if you're ever struggling to meet it, this might be something that you look for to see if you qualified for that. Here's a better example of it. So in this case here, the difference was $100,000. So you got $100,000 more in IDEA funds. You get to take a 50% drop in MOE, basically. So there are some specific provisions to qualify. You have to have a determination of meets the requirements. Your special ed directors know what that is. If you are not meeting the requirements for programs, then the feds are kind of like, well, hey, we don't want you to spend less. You need to possibly spend more to meet those needs. So there are specific provisions here to qualify for that, but I have programmed them in. So if you are not a meets on the determination, you can't even try and fill that box in. Okay, and the last piece of this, subsequent years, I want to make sure you guys understand what that is. Year to year to year, whatever your effort level is, if you drop below it, you're not meeting it. You have to go back to the original amount. So in this case, the example was 2017. The level of effort was $100. Let's just say. Did you meet MOE? Yes. In 18 and 19, you only spent 90. You didn't meet it. So in 2020, to qualify for the federal grant, you had to spend at least the 100. Okay. And it keeps showing you here, you have to keep subsequently meeting the same level. Okay. So that's what it means by the subsequent rule. MOE failure. If it happens, you will be notified and I will work with you. We will first look for exceptions, right? because I don't want you to have to pay back money because that's what it says you have to do. And then I have to send it back to the feds. I don't want to do that. And I'm going to tell you, we are amazing here in Idaho. You guys come to trainings, you listen, you track, you budget, and you guys are by far doing really well on the national level. We hardly ever have an LEA that does not meet the requirement. And usually it's because of turnover or you drew down too much IDEA or got last minute Medicaid or whatever it is. And usually it's worth it. You pay the $3,000 that you're short and you get a $50,000 grant. But you guys don't even go there hardly ever. Maybe one or two of you a year have this come up. So you guys are doing a fantabulous job. And I'm there to support you. So I will work with you, look for exceptions, see what we can do, make sure that, you don't have that failure in the future. So we got through a lot of slides and we have a few minutes left. I want to thank you first for providing the supports and the passionate service delivery and care you guys are providing to our students with disabilities. You guys do such a fabulous job. We are, again, one of the lower funded in the nation as far as in general for funding sources, and you guys do a lot with a little. You guys really do make sure, and we know that you guys are doing a good job because we see it in the compliance requirements. We see it on the programmatic side. We just know you guys are doing a great job. So with that, I have talked a lot at you. I want to go and see if we have anything else in the chat. I know everyone was thinking we'll never make it through 60 slides, but we did, you guys, we did. So I'm pausing. Does anybody have any burning desire questions they want to come off mute or put in the chat? I'm watching the chat. As we're closing here, if I don't see anything, I'm going to just say again, advocacy, back to telling an accurate story of what's happening, being able to voice what's happening in your community to your legislator or to your school board or to your superintendent when maybe he or she has a chance to go advocate. Tell them what's happening in your district. Tell them the struggles. Tell them, this is why it's costing us so much. Make sure that the special ed directors, make sure that you guys are talking with the business manager, making sure that everybody is available to the conversations. I do have something that came in. Somebody says if we receive Medicaid, I just want to make sure, if we receive Medicaid in 2020, 25, 26 for 24, 25 services, but we didn't accept that, how does that affect, or we didn't accrue for it, how does that affect MOE? That's a great question. I think I have time to answer it briefly. So I always talk about drawing the line in the sand. You got to close your books for audit at some point, but it's super important that you keep up to date on Medicaid reimbursements, because if you don't get them in timely, it can grow maintenance of effort, right? So in this case, there's no time to accrue. Maybe they're closed for audit. They're receiving funding in the current 25-26 school year for services from last year. It's prior year revenue, but it's going to then absorb a lot more costs this year. Well, then you're going to really have to watch maintenance of effort because you still have to meet it. You just had more Medicaid revenue. So it's affecting maintenance of effort. So you may have to spend more to absorb. And then that becomes there, right? And it's there. So you have to keep maintaining that. So it's definitely worth the time to try and keep maintenance of effort reasonable by keeping up on Medicaid claims and making sure to balance and offset with the IDEA funds. Somebody else asked, is it always a total budget amount, or could it be tied to the per pupil that's maintained? It can be either, and you can flip back and forth. So one year, your child count might go down and it might grow your per pupil, and then that's harder to keep meeting it on a higher per pupil. But if the costs go up overall, that might be harder to meet that year, and the next year you could meet it on the per pupil. So you guys can fluctuate back and forth. And yes, Sean was asking if this recording will be available. Yes, indeed it will. So if you were on today, I have your registration. You're going to get a copy of slides and you're going to get a link to the recording so that you'll know where it's posted. It'll be posted on the fiscal accountability page under special education. So it'll be available there for you guys to reference. And then again, if you guys have any other questions that come along after the fact, if I see that they are tied to this specific training, I will make sure to put those out with the recording as well, in case we need to clarify anything for anybody. But I do feel like we touched on a lot. And then I had another question, if a school has Medicaid eligible kids, do we have to bill for Medicaid? And Jennifer Hardy was correct. You don't have to. It is not in code that you have to. It is available to you to offset your costs. But if you don't bill for that, your costs go up. You're out of pocket. And for some districts and charters, they only have a few kids and it's not worth their time, in their opinion, to bill for those things. So it is not currently a requirement, correct? But again, it's covering about 13 to 15% of all y'all's costs across the state annually. So for a lot of you, it is worth it. And it totally depends on the kiddos. You might not need to until that one student moves in that has 4 billable services that are very costly. And then you might bill it for those years that that student attends. And then you can stop billing it. I would encourage you to take a look at that individually. Talk to your neighbors. They're always a really good just good to be able to bounce ideas off of or ask how they're doing it. Just continuing to watch the chat if we have any other questions, and I want to make sure I got them all. But my goal, Sean, for the recording is to have that up in a couple of days, posted to our site with the link to you guys in the email. But I really, again, just want to thank everybody. Maintenance of effort doesn't have to be hard to understand, but it can be difficult to meet. So if you are struggling there as well, make sure that you reach out because we are here to support you. So with that, you guys, I think we're at it. And I just want to thank everybody again and have a wonderful day. And we'll see you guys all next time.